Welcome to the videos on hints and tricks, and really this video could apply to any of your labs. So I'm not going to show you how to build something or an addition to the lab. What I'm going to show you is how not to break the lab. So these are hints, tricks, and lessons learned from thousands of students who built this exact VirtualBox cybersecurity lab using pfSense, a domain controller, a Windows workstation, and Kali Linux, and then they ran into the same problems over and over. So if you follow these tips, you'll save yourself hours of frustration. So the first thing I'll talk about is to free up some RAM on your host. And you can do this by disabling a service called sysman. So when you're running multiple VMs, your host machine is under heavy pressure for memory. So one hidden RAM consumer is the Windows service called sysmain, not to be confused with sysmon. Sysmain used to be called superfetch. And what sysmain does is it tries to preload apps into memory for faster launches. And it's great for normal users, but it's terrible if you're short of RAM. Additionally, you really don't need this anymore if you have a fast SSD, because the applications will load almost as quick if you have an NVMe SSD as they will from memory. So to disable that, just open services on your Windows host. You can do that by pressing Win plus or in the search bar, just start to type services.msc. And then scroll down, find sysmain, and then right click and select stop. And then you go double click it and go to set startup type and then change that to disabled. Now this helps because sysmain aggressively consumes RAM for caching. Disabling it frees up your memory for your virtual machines. You can also re-enable it later if you'd like to when you're not doing your labs. The second hint is to disable Windows widgets. Now you could do this on both your host and your Windows VM because the Windows widgets on Windows 11 constantly run in the background. So what it does, it pulls web content, it updates the news and weather, but while it's doing that, it's using RAM and CPU. So basically it's generating background network traffic. So this is great for everyday use for your user experience if you like to use those widgets, but it's bad if you're running a cybersecurity lab and you're short of resources. So to disable the widgets, you can just right-click on the taskbar, go to taskbar settings, and then turn widgets off. Now this helps because widgets continue running even when you don't open them. Disabling them frees up the resources for your lab. And I would suggest doing it not only on your host. If you're using a Windows system, I would also do it on your Windows VMs because once again, you're freeing up resources. The next hint is to extend your Windows evaluation license. Basically, the Windows server and some of the Windows images are evaluation copies. And after a period of time, you'll see a message that says this copy of Windows is not genuine, and it would randomly shut down about every hour. This is not your lab breaking, this is the evaluation timer expiring. Now you can fix this by opening a command prompt as administrator inside the Windows VM and just run the command slmgr /rearm and then reboot it. And that should restart your counter on your virtual machine. And you can do this multiple times. It's been reported as many as 6 times. And what this does is it extends your labs for many months. And if you want to know how much time you have left on your virtual machine, you could run that first part of that same command, slmgr and then /dli, and that should tell you how much time you have left on your virtual machines. The next hint is to snapshot everything. This saves hours of unnecessary rebuild time. So before you touch anything, take a snapshot. When you set up pfSense and it's working, take a snapshot. After the domain controller is working, take a snapshot. After Windows joins the domain, take another snapshot. And after Kali has internet, take another snapshot. This means These labs, they are meant to be broken so you can experiment and try new things. However, you can save time when you reconfigure just by going back to the previous snapshots. The next hint is sort of understand your virtual network types. So most lab issues are not pfSense issues, they're actually VirtualBox network issues. And what you need to remember is bridged or NAT, that gives pfSense the internet. So if it's bridged, it's getting the IP address from the home router. And if it's NAT, then it's getting the IP address from VirtualBox. But that's how VirtualBox and your machines are reaching the internet. Now the internal network, which is all your lab machines, this connects all those together, whether it's LAN 0 or LAN 1, you have to set it to our internal network first. So basically, if a machine can ping 8.8.8.8, but not other lab machines, then you probably have the wrong adapter picked in VirtualBox Manager. Also, if a machine can talk to each other, but not the internet, then there's an issue with that bridged or NAT adapter. So 90% of the problems happen there, not actually on pfSense. The next hint is pfSense is blocking you on purpose. So the implicit deny. So students will say, I didn't block anything. Well, they don't have to, because pfSense blocks everything unless you allow it. That's what we talked about in the video about implicit deny. So the LAN might work, but the WAN doesn't, and the VLANs can't talk to each other, and new interfaces appear to be dead. This is not a mistake. That's how real firewalls work. So you need to actually set a rule if you want the different VLANs to talk to each other and if you want your machines to have internet access. The next hint is to always test in a certain order. When something doesn't work, test it in this exact order. Can you ping the default gateway? Can you ping another lab machine? Can you ping 8.8.8? And can I resolve google.com? These 4 tests basically tell you where the problem is. If the gateway fails, then it's an IP or an adapter issue. If a lab machine fails, then it's an internal network issue. If 8.8.8.8 fails, then it's a pfSense rule or maybe a NAT issue. And lastly, if the DNS fails, then it's a DNS configuration issue. The next hint, always start pfSense first, and then start your domain controller, then start your Windows, and then start your Kali VM. Be sure that pfSense is up and running before you start your domain controller. The same thing, make sure the domain controller is up and running before you start that Windows VM. And that's because all your VMs need to use pfSense, and your domain join Windows machines need to use that domain controller. So if you don't start them in the exact order, then you're going to run into problems, and it will take hours of troubleshooting to try to figure out that your lab's not actually broken. You just started the machines in the wrong order. The next hint is static IPs are your friend. What that means is make sure you set a static IP on any kind of a server or any kind of service that you want to reach back to on a consistent basis. Because if you're using DHCP, there is a chance it will get a DHCP lease with a different IP address. And then you've got all kinds of problems because you won't be able to communicate with that server. And if you're using a SIM like Splunk or Elastic or Waza, then you're not going to be able to forward your logs to that SIM if you do not have a static IP address, and that IP address changes when it gets the next DHCP lease. The next hint is the console in pfSense is a lifesaver. So if you lock yourself out of the pfSense GUI, you don't need to panic. You can open pfSense VM, use that console menu, and you could reset the web password, you can reassign interfaces, and you could even reset everything to factory. So you're never truly fully locked out as long as you have access to the pfSense console. The next hint is a lot of problems with Kali reaching the internet are usually DNS. It's not Kali itself. So if Kali can ping 8.8.8, but you try to run apt update, but it fails, that's not a Kali problem. That is a DNS through pfSense not being allowed. So students will reinstall Kali for this, but you don't need to do that. You just need to troubleshoot your DNS. So if you can reach 8.8.8.8, you should be able to do the download of the updates. But if you don't, it's because DNS is broke. And if you watch it when you run apt update, you'll see it's trying to reach a domain, not an IP address. So that's why it's DNS. Also, next hint is resource allocation matters. So if things start to feel groggy or slow or buggy on a particular VM, look at how much RAM you've given it, how many CPUs, and can you afford to go ahead and up those resources, because basically starving a VM causes what's known as ghost problems that look like networking issues, but they're actually just performance issues. The next hint is if something is weird, reboot pfSense first. So those pfSense applies rules both for NAT, DNS, and routing. And if the behavior is strange, if you reboot pfSense before touching anything else, you'd be surprised how many times that fixes your problem. The next hint is think about this as you're building a real enterprise network, because this lab behaves like a real company network. There's a firewall in the middle, there's domain authentication, there's segmented machines, and there's attacker machines. So when something doesn't work, think like an engineer, not a home user. So basically, in closing, if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this: most problems are the wrong adapter, a missing firewall rule, DNS not being allowed, or you forgot to take a snapshot. So this lab is not fragile, it's just realistic. And that's exactly why it's so powerful for learning cybersecurity.